She looked at me like I didn't belong here, in the house I built with every drop of my strength. She spoke with the kind of arrogance that grows when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. She touched my things like they were hers, walked through my kitchen like it was her throne, and in that moment, something inside me turned quiet and cold. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to learn what happens when someone forgets whose name is written on the walls they stand in. Thank you so much for watching my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so go on and leave it in the comments. It truly means a lot to me. My name is Thelma, and I live in Alaska, where the air gets cold, but the memories stay warm, even when the people in them change. I was born in a small town, not too far from where I live now, and I have carried this house on my shoulders for many years. Piece by piece, brick by brick, sacrifice after sacrifice. I built it not because I wanted a palace, but because I wanted a safe place to grow old in. A place filled with laughter, respect, and peace. When I first opened these doors, I imagined it would be the kind of home where family would gather with kindness in their hearts, not sharpened words or silent battles. I have lived a long life, the kind where you remember every ache that built your strength and every soft moment that shaped your soul. I raised my son on these floors, I cooked on this same stove, and I slept under this roof through winters so cold the walls would sing with the wind. Everything in this house carries a story, a fingerprint of my journey. And for the longest time, I believed that when I grew older, it would be a place where respect lived, where the people I loved would protect the walls as fiercely as I did. But time can surprise you, can it? It can turn laughter into silence, promises into thin air, and a home that once felt full of warmth into a place that suddenly feels foreign. I started noticing how the air in my own kitchen began to feel different, how footsteps echoed with a weight I didn't recognize. There were little moments, small enough to ignore at first, but they grew into something bigger, something sharp. And as I stood in that kitchen watching her act, like I was nothing more than a shadow, I realized this wasn't just a house anymore. It had become a stage, and I was standing on it with someone who believed she could push me off. She truly thought she had the power to rewrite the story I spent my life building. I came to Alaska as a much younger woman, full of determination and stubborn hope, long before my hands grew tired and my hair turned white. I didn't have much when I started, just a will that refused to bend, and a heart that knew how to keep going, no matter how heavy the days became. I worked jobs that most people would turn away from. Long hours with little pay. And when the nights grew too cold, I would wrap myself in old blankets and whisper to myself that one day I would have a home of my own, a place no one could take from me. When I finally saved enough to buy this land, I stood in the middle of it with tears in my eyes, my hands in the frozen soil, and I promised myself that this would be the place where I would grow old with dignity and peace. I spent years working on this house, not because it was easy, but because it mattered to me. Every nail, every beam, every inch of it carries the memory of my hard work, my laughter, my quiet prayers, and my sacrifices. When my son was born, this house became more than just shelter. It became the center of my world. I gave him everything I could, even when it going without for myself. There were nights I would come home so tired that I could barely lift my feet. But the moment I saw his little face, I would smile, because I knew that everything I was doing was for him. I raised him in warmth, in discipline, in love. I thought that when he grew older, he would understand what it took to keep this house standing. I thought he would value the roots we built here. I imagined that when he had a family of his own, they would fill this place with joy and respect, not entitlement and cruelty. When he brought her home for the first time, I remember how polite she was. She smiled sweetly, complimented the house, and called me kind. She would offer to help in the kitchen, and I, foolishly, believed her gestures were genuine. I welcomed her, not just into the house, but into my heart. I told myself, this is family now, and family means love, patience, and trust. But what I didn't see then was the way her eyes moved around this house, the way she touched things as though they already belonged to her. It was subtle, quiet, like a snake sliding between grass, but it was there, and it waited for the right moment to strike. The change came slowly, almost like winter creeping in through cracks in the window. She stopped asking and started demanding. She walked into my kitchen and rearranged things as if I were a guest in my own home. She corrected me in front of my son, brushed off my words like they were dust on the floor. I noticed how my voice began to matter less and less in my own house. And every time she spoke over me, my son stayed quiet. That silence, more than her words, cut into me. I kept telling myself it was just adjustment, that she was young and finding her place. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. And if I didn't hold my ground, one day I'd wake up in a house where I no longer belonged. That thought haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. I would sit by the window, the one facing the front yard, and stare into the dark, wondering when my home stopped feeling like mine. I remembered every struggle it took to build this place, every winter storm I survived alone, every small victory that had once made me proud. And now, all of it seemed to be fading behind her voice, her presence, her boldness. She wasn't just trying to live here. She was trying to rule here. And the saddest part was watching my son, the very boy whose footsteps once filled this house with laughter, stand by and let it happen. That kind of betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers. It slips in quietly, and it makes the walls you built with love feel like they're closing in on you. The day everything truly shifted was a quiet afternoon, the kind that should have felt calm and ordinary. But something in the air told me a storm was waiting behind the silence. I was in my kitchen, stirring the pot I've stirred for years, breathing in the scent that had always meant comfort to me, when she walked in wearing the slippers I bought for her. She didn't even look at me before speaking, as if I was nothing more than a shadow standing in a corner. She told me not to touch the stew, said it smelled old, as if my years of cooking in this kitchen didn't matter, as if the meals I once made with love meant nothing now. Then she turned and pointed to the chair at the corner, the chair I have sat on for decades, the chair where I would sip my tea every evening. She told me not to sit there anymore, because it was her spot now. The way she said it wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a knife pressing just enough to hurt. I stood there listening, trying to understand how a place I built with my own hands had suddenly become a place where my voice didn't carry weight. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with a tone soaked in ownership, like I was the one being allowed to stay under her roof. I looked at her, really looked, and I realized something cold had settled in her eyes. There was no kindness there, no respect. She had grown comfortable with disrespecting me because she thought my silence meant surrender. What she didn't know was that silence can be a warning before the storm. I tried to tell my son that her words cut through me like blades, but he brushed it off like it was nothing. He told me not to take it personally, as if it was all just a misunderstanding, as if I was imagining the way she looked at me, the way she claimed everything I held dear. I walked away that day with a weight in my chest, heavier than I'd ever felt before, and I knew deep down this wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about someone trying to push me out of the life I built. And what she didn't realize was that she was pushing the wrong woman. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly like a shadow growing longer as the sun goes down. And before I knew it, the warmth that used to fill my home had turned into something cold and distant. I started to notice the way she moved through the house, as if every room belonged to her. The way her voice grew louder, while mine grew quieter. Not because I lost it, but because I was trying to hold on to the dignity I spent years building. She started making small changes without asking, moving furniture that had been in the same place since the day I carried it in with my own hands, rearranging my kitchen like I was just a visitor. It may sound small to someone who has never had their space taken from them, but to me, every shelf, every drawer, every corner held a story. And watching someone strip away that quiet history felt like someone was peeling away pieces of my life, one by one. The worst part wasn't even the things she did, it was the way my son looked away when she did them. He didn't defend me, didn't speak up, didn't remind her whose house this truly was. He stood in silence, as if my pain was just a noise in the background. I used to look at him and see the little boy who used to run through these halls with scraped knees and laughter in his throat, but now I saw a man who couldn't meet my eyes when his wife disrespected me. That silence of his cut far deeper than any word she ever threw at me. It told me I was standing alone in a house I thought would always be my safe place. I started to sleep less, sitting up at night in my old chair, staring at the walls that used to give me comfort. I thought about everything I had poured into this place, all the years of hard work, the sacrifices I made to give him a better life, and how in return I was treated like someone who didn't matter. There's a kind of hurt that doesn't scream. It just sits quietly inside you, burning slow, waiting for the right moment to rise. And as I sat there listening to the silence of a house that no longer felt like mine, I knew something was shifting inside me too. I was done pretending not to see what was happening. I wasn't going to let anyone take away what I had spent a lifetime building, not even the two people I once trusted most. One afternoon, when the weight of everything I had been holding inside started to feel too heavy for my chest, I found myself sitting on the front steps of the house, staring at the sky as the cold breeze brushed across my face. I remember thinking how strange it was that this house, which had always been my safe place, now felt like it was holding its breath along with me. That was the day my neighbor, an old friend who had known me since the early years when I first built this place, walked over and sat beside me. She didn't need me to explain anything. She had seen the shift with her own eyes, seen how I had grown smaller in my own space while someone else tried to take up all the air. She leaned closer and said quietly, with the kind of voice that carries both kindness and truth, that silence can be powerful, but only if it leads to action. She reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, something buried beneath the pain of disappointment. She reminded me that this house, every inch of it, belonged to me. Her words were simple, but they woke something inside me that I thought I had lost. She reminded me of the paperwork I kept carefully tucked away, the title deed that bore my name, and my name alone. I had never needed to use it as a shield before, because this house had always been built on love, not battle. But hearing her say those words made me realize I didn't have to beg to stay in a place that was mine. I didn't have to accept disrespect just because it came from people I once trusted. That night, I sat at my table with the old deed laid out in front of me. My hands traced the ink slowly, and I remembered the day I signed those papers all those years ago. I had been proud then, but that night I felt something even stronger than pride. I felt clarity. I knew I wasn't weak, and I wasn't helpless. They might have thought my silence was surrender, but they forgot that silence can also mean calculation, patience, and strength. As I folded the deed back and placed it in the drawer, I whispered to myself that no one was going to push me out of my own life. Not now. Not ever. It was the first time in a long time that I felt the air in this house belonged to me again, and I knew that the day was coming when I would stop watching quietly and finally stand up for everything I had built. The moment came on a cold evening when the wind outside felt heavy, pressing against the windows like it wanted to hear what was about to happen. I had spent enough nights sitting quietly in that chair, watching my house slowly slip away piece by piece, and something inside me had finally settled. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. She walked into the kitchen with that same careless stride, the same sharp voice, as if every corner of this house belonged to her. But this time, I didn't look away. I stood right there, by the counter where I've cooked for years, and I asked her calmly to speak to me with respect. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight it hadn't carried in a long time. I saw her stop for a second, surprised that I had spoken up. She tilted her head back, gave me that familiar look of dismissal, and scoffed. Then she tossed her ponytail like she always did when she felt untouchable, and she said the words I will never forget. She said if I didn't like it, I could leave. She said it like she was doing me a favor by allowing me to stay. For a moment, everything around me went still. The air, the walls, the steady hum of the fridge, even the soft tapping of the wind against the window, all of it seemed to hold its breath. I looked at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with a quiet certainty. And that's when I told her to pack her things. The words came out steady and cold, the kind of cold that doesn't shake or break. I saw something flicker across her face, something between disbelief and rage, like no one had ever told her no before. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because she thought I was bluffing. But what she didn't understand was that I had spent my whole life building this house, surviving winters and storms, and there was nothing left in me to fear someone who only walked in halfway through the story. She turned her back, muttering under her breath, and I stood there still, calm and unmoved, knowing that everything she thought she had was about to slip from her hands. That was the night I stopped being silent. That was the night I made it clear that she was standing in my house, under my roof, and she was about to learn exactly what that meant. She didn't walk away quietly like someone who understood what she had just been told. She turned around with that same mocking grin, the kind that made it clear she still believed she had the upper hand. She walked straight into my bedroom without hesitation, like it was hers to claim, and started opening the closet where my clothes had hung for years. I watched her pull things out, like she was packing them for a trip, folding them roughly, stacking them in a careless pile, as if I was the one being sent away from the house I bled to build. For a moment, I just stood there, letting her dig deeper into the lie she had told herself, and when she looked back at me expecting to see fear or confusion, she saw none of it. She saw something colder, quieter, stronger. I walked into that room slowly, the way someone walks into a space they own, and my eyes fell on every single corner that carried a piece of my story. The closet I filled through years of hard work, the floor I scrubbed with my own hands, the walls that held my laughter and my tears. She thought this was just a house, but to me, it was my life stitched into wood and stone. And in that moment, I realized she had no power here, only the illusion of it. So I let out a small, cold laugh, not forced, not bitter, just a sound that came from knowing something she didn't. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the deed, the same piece of paper that had waited quietly for this very moment. I held it in my hand like a silent storm and said, "This house is mine." The way her face changed will stay with me forever. The color drained from her cheeks, her hands froze mid-fold, and for the first time since she walked through my door, she didn't have a single word to say. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain myself. The truth was written on that paper long before she ever stepped foot in my life. I stood there, calm, steady, unmoved by her wide eyes or the tension growing thick between us. In that silence, she finally understood that everything she tried to take had never been hers, and never would be. She had mistaken my silence for weakness, but what she was seeing now was strength that had been forged through years of building, surviving, and standing alone when I had to. And as she stood there, clutching my clothes with trembling hands, I knew that the ground beneath her feet had just shifted. And this time, it would not shift back. It was right after that silence settled thick in the room that I heard the sound of the front door slam. Heavy, sharp, like anger itself had just walked in. My son's voice came before he even appeared in the hallway, raised, filled with a heat that I had never heard directed at me before. I stood there, holding the deed in my hand, steady as a tree that's been through too many storms to fear another one. He came rushing in, face red with anger, breathing hard, like someone ready for a fight. He didn't ask a single question, didn't try to understand, he just looked at me like I was the problem in my own house. He shouted that I was tearing the family apart, as if standing up for myself was a crime. As if claiming what I built with my hands was something to be ashamed of. I watched his jaw tighten, his eyes flicker with something between rage and desperation. And for a moment, I remembered him as the little boy who used to cling to my hand. That memory made my heart ache, because now standing in front of me was a man who had forgotten who raised him, who had chosen someone else's comfort over the truth that had kept this roof above his head. His wife stood behind him, quiet now, but her silence carried that same twisted confidence that came from knowing she had already poisoned his ears. He shouted again, louder this time, but all I felt was a strange stillness inside me. The kind of stillness that comes when you finally had enough. Then it happened so fast that it felt like the air cracked in half. His hand shot out, he grabbed the back of a chair and lifted it, like he believed he could scare me into backing down. like the woman who raised him would suddenly become small just because he was loud. But I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just stood there, my eyes locked on his, holding that deed like a quiet weapon of truth. He swung that chair, and instead of hitting me, it slammed against the doorframe, splintering the wood and breaking the chair in half. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, sharp and final. He froze, his eyes wide, his chest heaving, as if even he didn't recognize what he had just done. The room went silent, the kind of silence that weighs heavy on your skin. And in that silence, I saw it. The instant he realized he had crossed a line he could never step back over. That look in his eyes, a mix of shock and shame, burned itself into my memory. He had tried to frighten me, to control me, but what he saw instead was the woman who built this house, still standing strong, while everything around him cracked. He would carry that moment for the rest of his life, because from that day on, he would never again have the power to look me in the eye without remembering the sound of that chair breaking against my wall. The moment that chair shattered against the doorframe, something in that house shifted forever. The sound didn't just echo through the hallway, it cut through everything that had been holding me down for years. He stood there frozen, his hands still gripping the air, as if the chair hadn't already fallen to the floor in splinters. His chest rose and fell too fast, his face still flushed with anger. But his eyes were no longer full of power. They were full of something else. A stunned silence wrapped around the room, thick and heavy, pressing down on all of us. She stood behind him, clutching my clothes in her hands like a thief caught in the middle of her own scheme. And for the first time since she came into my home, she had nothing to say. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I just stood there with the same calm that had been growing inside me. The kind that doesn't come from winning an argument, but from finally refusing to be stepped on. He had expected me to shrink back, to cower, to beg. Instead, I met his stare with a steady gaze that carried years of sacrifice, years of giving everything to build this life, years of keeping silent while they grew bold. I saw the realization hit him slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a wall. He had lost something that night, something he didn't even understand yet. And in that moment, I no longer saw him as the man trying to scare me. I saw him as someone who would have to live with the weight of this moment for the rest of his life. The house felt different now, almost like it was breathing with me again. It no longer felt like a place where I had to hold my pain in silence. It felt like the house itself was standing beside me, remembering who it belonged to. I could see it in his eyes as he looked down at the broken chair, realizing that everything he thought he could control had just slipped through his fingers. He knew he couldn't undo what had just happened. There was no apology, no excuse, no quick fix that would erase the fact that he had stood against me in a place built by my hands. That night would follow him. Even in the quiet moments, even when no one was watching. I took a slow breath, not because I needed to steady myself, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. The power of standing firm. The quiet strength that doesn't need to shout. I wasn't the one who lost control, and that was something they would never forget. He didn't say another word, but his silence spoke louder than anything. It carried the weight of a man who had just watched his own reflection crack. And she, standing behind him with her lips pressed tight, finally understood what she had underestimated all along. This wasn't her house. It never was. And after that night, neither of them would ever forget it again. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could ever be. It filled the walls, seeped into the floor, and settled deep into the corners of the house like something that would never fully leave. I watched him lower his hands slowly, his breathing uneven, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He looked at the broken chair like it was something far bigger than wood and splinters, and in a way, it was. It was the moment he crossed a line he couldn't walk back over. The moment everything changed between us. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence carried a weight that no words could match, and he felt it. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his anger began to wither into something else, something smaller and ashamed. She was still standing there, pale and stiff, holding the clothes she thought would be mine to carry out of the house, but now her hands shook just a little. For the first time, the boldness she wore like armor had cracked. She had built her confidence on the belief that I would never fight back, that I would just keep letting her take piece after piece of what I built. But that night, she saw the woman who laid the foundation of this home. Not the quiet figure she had grown used to dismissing. She dropped the clothes slowly onto the bed, and the sound of the fabric falling was soft, but in that silence, it felt louder than a door slamming shut. It wasn't long before the knock came at the door. Neighbors who had heard the shouting. It didn't take long for the officers to arrive after the call, their footsteps heavy on the porch, their voices calm and measured. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't try to make excuses for what happened. Because this wasn't about anger, this was about respect. I told the truth with a steady voice. They saw the broken chair, they saw his face, they saw the tremor in the air that still lingered, and as they spoke to him, his anger turned into silence. His head lowered like a man who had just met the consequences of his own choices. She stayed close to the wall, quiet now, her arrogance nowhere to be found. I watched her face as she realized the power she thought she had was nothing more than a shadow. That house belonged to me, and the law knew it too. Every document, every word, every brick was mine. There was no fight left to have. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to demand. The truth stood on its own. And they both saw it. He was told to leave for the night, and she followed him out. No more smirks, no more sharp words. Just the cold reality of what they had done and what they had lost. And when that door finally closed behind them, the house let out a kind of quiet I hadn't heard in years, like it had finally exhaled with me. When the door finally shut behind them, the house felt still in a way I hadn't felt for a very long time. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't make you uneasy. The kind that sits with you quietly, almost like it's wrapping itself around you. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, my hand resting against the wall, feeling the heartbeat of the home I had built. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me again. The air no longer carried the weight of tension. No heavy footsteps trying to erase my presence, no sharp voice filling the rooms with disrespect. Just silence, steady and calm. The kind of silence that lets your heart breathe. I walked through the house slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to feel every part of it. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, my room, each corner felt like it was whispering back to me, reminding me of everything I had survived to keep these walls standing. I sat down on my chair, the one she had once tried to claim, and I let my hands rest on my lap as I closed my eyes for a moment. The wind outside brushed gently against the windows, and the quiet hum of the heater was the only sound left. It was strange how something so simple could feel like victory. Not the kind that comes with noise or celebration, but the kind that settles deep inside your bones. I thought about everything that had led to that night, every insult, every quiet moment where I swallowed my pain, every time I questioned whether I should keep enduring it for the sake of peace. And now here I was, sitting in the same chair, but everything around me felt different. It was no longer their voices that filled this house. It was mine. It always should have been mine. I took a slow breath and let it out, and it felt like I was letting go of years of holding back. For the first time in so long, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home again. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. I knew they would come back with their words, their excuses, their wounded pride. But I also knew something else, something unshakable. They could talk, they could try, they could twist the story however they wanted. None of it would change the truth. This was my house. I built it, I bled for it. And after what happened, they would never again look at me the way they used to. That night wasn't just about taking my space back. It was about reclaiming the part of me they thought they could silence. That quiet victory was mine, and I was going to hold it close like a shield no one could ever take from me. That night, as the quiet settled deeper into the walls, I sat there in that chair for a long time, not because I was waiting for anything, but because I wanted to remember exactly how this moment felt. The house was mine again, not just on paper, but in spirit. It was as if the walls themselves had taken a long breath after years of being held too tight. The weight that had pressed down on my chest for so long had finally lifted. I ran my fingers across the armrest, feeling the smooth surface I had polished 100 times over the years, and a kind of peace I hadn't known in a long time began to settle inside me. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, steady, and warm. The kind of peace that doesn't come from winning against someone, but from standing your ground when it truly matters. I thought about the road I had walked to get here. How much I had given, how much I had lost, how many nights I had swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. I remembered the way her voice had filled this house like smoke, and how his silence had made the walls colder. And now there was nothing left of that. Just my voice, my breath, my heartbeat echoing softly in the space I built with my own 2 hands. This house had carried me through winters that tried to break me, through long years of raising him alone, through tears I never let anyone see. It was more than wood and stone. It was my story. And no one, no matter how loud they became, could ever erase that. I leaned back and let my eyes wander around the room. Every piece of furniture, every little crack on the wall, every small detail that told me I had lived a full and hard life here. For so long, I had let someone else's voice drown mine out, but tonight, I remembered who I was. I was not some frail woman waiting to be pushed aside. I was the woman who built this life from the ground up, and I had just reminded them of that. I knew they wouldn't forget the sound of that chair breaking or the silence that followed. That silence would follow them wherever they went. It's strange how power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with quiet certainty, with the stillness of a person who has nothing left to fear. And that's what I felt sitting there. No fear, no bitterness, just strength. Real strength. The kind that doesn't beg for understanding or apology. The kind that simply exists. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the warmth of the heater brush against my skin. That house was mine before they came, and it would be mine long after they were gone. That was the truth, and the truth had finally stood taller than the noise. The next morning, when the sun pushed its light gently through the curtains, I sat in the same chair and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that weighs on your chest. It was the kind that wraps around you and tells you that you've made it through. The house looked the same, the walls hadn't changed, the floor still creaked in the same spot, but everything felt different. It wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine again, fully, completely, deeply mine. I thought about the look on their faces when they realized their control had vanished, the way everything they had built on arrogance and disrespect crumbled the moment they saw the truth in my hands. And I knew they would never see this house the same way again. Because now they understood that what I built could not be taken, only protected. I sat there, letting the warmth of the morning sun touch my face, and I smiled. Not out of pride, not out of spite, but out of a quiet strength that came from surviving what was meant to break me. I didn't need to shout to prove my worth. I didn't need to fight to prove what was mine. I just needed to stand and let the truth speak for itself. And it did. From that day on, they would never be able to look at me without remembering the moment they pushed too far and found out just how strong I really am. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I truly appreciate every single one of you who listens with your heart. If my story touched something inside you, if you've ever had to stand your ground and protect what is yours, then don't forget to leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And please, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story I share with you.